There is a plant that requires no planting, no irrigation, no fertilizer, no seasonal rotation, no careful management of soil chemistry or water table or rainfall patterns. A plant that grows in the places modern agriculture cannot go. The swamps, the floodplains, the waterlogged lowlands that every farming system in history has written off as wasteland. And from those places, for thousands of years, it fed entire civilizations. You have not heard much about it. That is not an accident. Today, the world grows rice on flooded paddies that require precise water management, chemical inputs, and seasonal replanting. It grows wheat on vast plains maintained by fossil fuel machinery and synthetic nitrogen. It grows maize in monocultures that exhaust the same soil year after year, held together by an increasingly expensive chemistry. These systems feed the world. They also depend on conditions that are, quietly, becoming less reliable. The sago palm was never part of this system. It was the system that came before, the one that worked without all of this. And the reason it was replaced has very little to do with nutrition, or yield, or efficiency. It has to do with ownership. This is Ancient Food Files, a channel for the knowledge that was buried before anyone thought to ask why. If what is disappearing from the world troubles you, if the record still matters, subscribe. Not for growth, for the archive.
In the Maluku Islands of eastern Indonesia, there is a word, tumang. It refers to the moment a sago palm reaches its peak starch content, just before it flowers, just before it fruits, in the brief window when the trunk holds more energy than at any other point in its life. The people of Maluku did not discover this window by accident. They observed it across generations. They passed the knowledge on it the way other cultures pass the knowledge of when to plant and when to harvest, through language, through practice, through the particular attention that only long habitation can produce. The Sawai people of Seram Island speak of the sago grove as a living inheritance, not a field, not a farm, a presence that precedes the living and will outlast them. In the oral traditions of the Asmat people of Papua, sago is not simply food, it is origin. The first human beings, in some tellings, emerged from a sago trunk, born from the same place the starch is born, in the soft white heart of the palm. These are not myths in the dismissive sense. They are ecological memory, the record of a relationship so long and so complete that it required a cosmology to hold it. The sago palm, Metrosalon sagu, grows to 30 meters. Its trunk, in the years before flowering, becomes a slow accumulation of starch, not fruit, not seed, starch stored in the pith of the trunk itself. The fronds spread wide and high, catching whatever light filters through the canopy. At the base, new shoots emerge continuously, suckers, offshoots, the next generation already beginning before the parent has finished. The grove does not need to be planted, it regenerates from within itself. A single grove, left undisturbed, expands outward across decades, colonizing the swamp on its own terms.
The biology of sago is an argument against the logic of modern food systems. Most staple crops convert sunlight to starch through their seeds, the part of the plant that must be harvested, stored, replanted, and managed through an annual cycle vulnerable to drought, flood, disease, and market fluctuation. Sago stores its starch in its trunk. The trunk is perennial. The trunk does not depend on a single season of rainfall. It accumulates over 7 to 10 years, drawing from groundwater that most agricultural systems cannot access. A single mature sago palm can yield between 150 and 300 kilograms of dry starch, one tree. Processed and dried, that starch provides roughly 2,000 calories per kilogram. A hectare of sago grove produces more starch per year than a hectare of rice, with no inputs, no irrigation, no tillage, and no replanting. It grows in water. It does not compete with dryland agriculture. It occupies the margins that every other food system abandons. And when it is harvested, the grove continues. The shoots at the base become the next generation. The swamp continues. This is a food system with no annual failure point. That is not a small thing. In 1579, Francis Drake anchored near the coast of what is now Maluku, in the final stretch of his circumnavigation of the globe. His crew, depleted and underfed, recorded their first encounter with sago bread, papeda, the gray, gelatinous paste made by boiling sago starch in water. They did not praise its taste, but they noted it sustained them. The VOC, the Dutch East India Company, established its spice monopoly in Maluku in the early 17th century. The islands that produced nutmeg and cloves also produced sago. The local populations, dispossessed of their land and forced into labor, survived on sago when colonial food systems failed to provision them adequately. It survived famines. It survived the disruption of trade routes. It survived the destruction of gardens and rice fields that colonial conflict periodically produced. In 1621, when Jan Pieter Zoon Cohen ordered the massacre of the Banda Islands, nearly the entire indigenous population killed or expelled to seize the nutmeg trade. The survivors who fled to other islands carried knowledge of sago with them. They had nothing else. The sago groves were already there. In Papua, into the 20th century, populations in the interior lived almost entirely on sago during the wet season, when gardens were inaccessible. Entire communities, sustained not by agriculture, but by a perennial grove that did not care about the rains. The Dutch colonial administration documented this with something between admiration and unease. A population that could feed itself without cleared land, without planted crops, without dependency on supplied goods, was a population that was difficult to govern. This is precisely why sago was gradually written out of food policy. Not by a single decision, not by any one administrator or institution, by a logic, a slow, systemic logic that made sago incompatible with the world being built around it. Sago cannot be easily taxed. It grows in swamps that resist survey and registration. It belongs to groves, not to plots. It does not fit the categories of land tenure that colonial administration and later national land law required. It is unownable in the ways that matter to systems built on ownership. After independence Indonesia, the development logic of the New Order government under Suharto pushed rice as the national staple. Rice agriculture was legible. It could be measured, subsidized, taxed, and controlled through a national logistics system, Bulog, that became one of the most powerful institutions in the country. Sago had no equivalent. Sago was unmanageable at national scale. It grew where it grew. It was processed by hand, village by village, grove by grove. There was no sago Bulog. The sago grove does not need a stable climate to produce. It does not need a dry season at a predictable time. It does not need soil that has been prepared. It needs a swamp. And the swamps are still there, diminished, drained in places, but still there. The sago palm did not wait for the development economists to reconsider their models. It did not wait for the climate scientists to publish their findings, or for the food security researchers to update their projections. It kept growing in the swamps. It kept sending up new shoots at its base. It kept accumulating starch in its trunk, on its own schedule, in its own time, by its own logic. In the interior of Seram Island, there are groves that have been producing continuously since before the VOC arrived, since before the word Indonesia existed, since before anyone thought to measure their yield in tons per hectare. They will be producing after the systems that replace them have finished their particular experiment. The knowledge was not lost, it was set aside, by people who are told they no longer needed it, by children who learned to be ashamed of the great paste their grandmothers made, by governments that believed a nation eating rice was more modern than a nation eating sago, and that modernity was in all cases the correct direction. The swamp kept the knowledge, in the roots, in the pith, in the slow accumulation of starch that does not require anyone's permission or approval or policy memo to continue. If there are stories like this that you believe should not disappear, subscribe. The archive is still open.